Why, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. My name is Mr. Debrouillez-Vous, and welcome back to TNO Dev Diary readings. I was interested in doing more of these, and I was excited to get an opportunity to do more of these. I just did not realize it was going to be this soon. But here we are with Development Diary number 31, Debrouillez-Vous. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I watched a YouTube tutorial on how to pronounce that properly like 5 times already. So, Debrouillez-Vous. Now, some of you might be wondering, wait a minute, I thought this might be a little familiar. Some of you might not know what's happening at all. But those who've been paying attention to the TNL mod and the submod days might have this name ringing a bit of a bell. This was originally submod. It gets into this a little bit later, so I'm jumping ahead a little bit. This is another instance of a TNO submod being integrated into the main mod proper. So you have this with Cold Southern Springs, which eventually became the South America team. The Britain rework was really British submod. What else? I believe Operation Deep Freeze was its own submod originally. So the whole map rework and all that is now just a part of the base game. I feel like there was one other that I can't quite remember. If so, I can't recall. But this is at least the 4th time this has happened. Maybe 5th, if I could remember what the 5th time was. So, you know what? I'm interested in any new TNO content, even if they have to annex other submods in order to get it going. I haven't played any Deep Freeze content yet. I probably should, but I just haven't had the time, and it doesn't seem immediately clear as to how to play it. But all the other stuff, like the Brazil content, I just finished that. The Brazil content, other than maybe Guangdong, is probably still my favorite in all of TNO. So they did a very good job there. And the new British rework is interesting. It's far too short. I would have fleshed it out way more and had more content in there. But I liked it a lot still. So, I'm curious to see what's going to happen with Debrouillez-Vous. I have a few concerns. We'll get to that when we get to the 4th part, I suppose. And maybe as I read this, these concerns will dissipate as they go along. And I read. But we might as well figure out what we are dealing with first, so let's go ahead and hop on in. Let's go to the introduction. Welcome to the Debrouillez-Vous Development Diary. Today, the Africa Leads will be discussing the future of the TNO Africa and its planned patch. Some of you may be familiar with Debrouillez-Vous already, but for those of you who are not aware, it is a submod that has been in development aiming at a rework of Africa to fit modern TNO standards. We've decided to integrate them into the development team to help serve as the basis for a new and comprehensive Africa patch. Alongside TNO and DV's Africa devs, we've also fully involved the devs of other countries in the making of this new patch, finding as many places as possible for the countries to interact with Africa. And many of the Africa devs, including all the leads, also serve on teams for countries interacting with Africa. We aim to provide an intriguing and comprehensive view of Africa in the 1960s and onward, focusing on how the alternative history that TNO represents will lead to vastly different fates for the African continent compared to that of our timeline. Debrouillez-Vous aims to provide a dynamic and changing Africa in which the superpowers are struggling for dominance from 1962 to the end of the game, and in which Africa can end in hugely different situations. In 2 separate games of TNO, you might, for instance, see the emerging of region-spanning African superstates, or you may see the colonial powers retaining their dominance over the region, and the African continent swallowed on the darkness of European rule forever. Debrouillez-Vous is a full update that focuses on providing proxy conflicts for the player to enjoy, and as such, we are focusing on ensuring that every part of this patch's skeleton will seamlessly interface with that of existing powers. So if you are playing any nation that interacts with Africa, you will see gameplay actively enriched by this patch. This patch is not a vague concept, but something that's actively being worked on as you read this. Africa will receive fully reactive skeleton content that goes up to the game's end of the 70s in this update. So enjoy reading the rest of his diary, and we hope you will be happy with it. So off the bat, we're being told the rework is happening. We are not told when. The one thing that did reassure me about the last development diary. And I think they realized that they needed to tread this very carefully. Since Latino America's content, you have a lot of beloved things in there, the NPP. A lot of stuff that was getting scratched or potentially reworked, and we don't know the full scope of it. But they were transparent, and they said, okay, this is fully playable. We're going to be cutting stuff, but we're going to be replacing with equal content. So they learned from some of the, I don't want to say quite, maybe headaches that came with the Britain rework. I think you could still play the old Britain content in the game rules, I want to say. So it's not completely lost, I suppose. I don't know if they still have that feature, though. The one thing that I'm reading this, and I'm pausing a little bit, is that they're not transparent on when this is coming out. Like, the US content we know is coming out at the end of next year, I believe they said. This is another vague update on when it may or may not be coming out for. I assume it's going to be coming out relatively soon. I'm going to assume by the end of the year, maybe? I don't know. It's not entirely clear. At least right now. Maybe when I skimmed through, I missed it, but and when we get to that point, I'm going to feel like a silly Billy. A silly goose. A fucking idiot. So we'll just see when we get there. And first, let's figure out what they're doing to begin with. So, automatically, we're looking at British West Africa, and just West Africa in general looks quite different. First off, a lot of French. Not free French, just French. Second, Cameroon is not nearly as big as it was. And third, you might notice a conspicuously missing body of liquid over here. I forget if it extends out exactly this much, but it looks like they have gotten rid of the big lake in the Congo, which I thought that was still kind of cool to have a little remnant of old TNO. If they're scrapping and getting rid of something more comprehensive, then so be it. The skeleton content, all the arcades in Africa and South Africa have focus trees. So if you're just cutting that and we're just getting skeleton content, I'm not 100% on how I feel about that, personally. I would have appreciated a little bit more of full content. Maybe we'll get that. Who knows? I should stop dilly-dallying and just get on with this. At least start actually reading. So, British West Africa, we have three gents right here. We have William John Peel, Gerald Creasy, and Douglas Hull. I'm curious of what I'm going to find when I Google these guys. William John Peel, British conservative politician. Honorary member of Brunei aristocracy. Just looks like a generic nobleman. Oh, he said some racist shit about Kenyans. Okay. I was nervous about the trend I was gonna see, and Douglas Hall. Let's see what we got. Okay, the 14th Baronet. So I'll show these as I pull them up. So John Peel said, political member, provoked angry response to the Mouse when reacted to the Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya by saying, "There are obvious risks in dealing with desperate and subhuman individuals." In the resulting debate, Peel's remarks were denounced by Enoch Powell. If you know anything about Enoch Powell, when you get condemnations for him on racially charged things, you know you've gone too far. Douglas Hall, this guy, another British guy, last governor of British Somaliland. Look at that. Looks like he served North Rhodesia as well. Another colonial guy, another lord type guy as well. And who was this last guy? Gerald Creasy. Governor of Gold Coast and of Malta. So Gold Coast, let's believe, former Kenya. not Kenya, Ghana. Oh no, the Christian Borg Crossroads shooting incident. This does not sound very, very good. 3 or 4 World War II veterans were killed, 60 wounded that day while demonstrating about end of service benefits. Oh no. They blamed Crazy Creasy for all this unrest. Great. So this should give you a sense of a tone of what's going to be happening in British West Africa. A man who Enoch Powell even told to chill out. Boring colonial administrator, and probably the most boring part of colonial Africa, and a guy who denied veteran benefits and shot World War II veterans. Very, very charming. Anyway, when Britain finally capitulated to the German onslaught, it did not do so as not as an island nation, but as the overlord of the empire upon which the sun never set. What defeat meant, however, was that the sun would indeed set upon much of the British Empire. Victorious Axis powers carved out major concessions from London. Italy gained dominion over the Mediterranean and Near East, while Japan became the undisputed master of Southeast Asia. Worst of all of these losses was the loss of India, Victoria's hard-won crown jewel and the foundation of much of Britain's success and wealth over the past few centuries. Adding further injury, the dominions, all of whom were distant and independent enough to avoid conquest, refused to follow their mother country into the fascist yoke. For any proud Britain, it was a crushing humiliation. A humiliation would indelibly shape the thinking of the British elite under the new order. That's the name of the mod. Initially, the first collaboration government of William Maxwell Aitken, the Lord Beaverbrook, did not change much for Africa, being to focus on the reconstruction and rebuilding of state authority in Britain proper. His successor as Prime Minister, the Duke of Bedford, a noted reactionary fascist, felt more comfortable, turning attention back to the remnants of the empire. He established a colonial consensus with the British People's Party. I think that's what the acronym is, if I'm not mistaken. Bedford's government revoked voting rights from all native Africans, limited legislative councils to whites, although it disempowered even these segregated bodies in favor of more autocratic governorships. Many of the institutions of British India were grafted onto Africa in an effort to maintain imperial legitimacy. Most notably, King Edward VIII was crowned as Emperor of Africa under the Bedford government. The BPP's party organization was not exported to Africa. The colonial regimes are strictly nonpartisan. Bedford's successors, A.K. Chesterton and Barry Domville, retained virtually the same colonial policy backed by an increasingly hawkish and hardline military under the leadership of Gerald Templer and Walter Walker. Both Templer and Walker are experienced colonial enforcers, Templer having suppressed the Mau Mau in Kenya, and Walker doing the same to the Tanu and Tanganyika. Tanganyika, for those of you who don't know, is modern-day Tanzania? I forget how to pronounce it. It's the mainland bit, not the little islands off the coast of it. Post-war Britain's longest-serving colonial secretary, the one who's the most defined their new policies, is the Southern Rhodesian aristocrat Angus Graham, the Duke of Montrose. The BPP's current colonial consensus is only really challenged internally by the pragmatist faction who favor granting homeworld to most colonies and lifting many of the petty racial restrictions. Despite this, the pragmatists are in no way opposed to the empire as a concept or to the status quo of de facto white supremacy. The BPP's status as the party of empire, born in no smart part out of the opposition to Indian autonomy, makes a true break with colonialism possible for any of the collaborationist leaders. Interesting indeed. So I wonder what's going to happen in the case that the resistance ends up winning. First off, will the colonial governments even respect that British authority? Second, if they do and they do fall upon, how are they going to handle it? A lot of interesting questions that come with that. Now, we're going to have to wait for the rest of the British content to be added, or at least another portion of it to be added to figure that out. But color me curious. Anyhow. Within the British outpost in West Africa, any tentative liberalization introduced by the pre-war colonial administration was rapidly reversed when the BPP regime came into power. The new regime favored indirect rural racial laws and the disempowerment of all urban evulés. As these policies began to be implemented alongside heavy taxes and new economic restrictions designed to make wealth extraction easier, unrest began to increase steadily in British West Africa. The fiercest resistance was in the Gold Coast, leading to a wave of disorganized violence sweeping the colony in 1948. After veterans' protest in Accra was brutally suppressed. Although Governor Gerald Creasy successfully ended demonstrations, they led to the Convention People's Party's rise under the leadership of the exiled nationalist Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah? I forget how to pronounce it. A robust nationalist underground soon took shape under the direction of the CPP. When the first great uprising erupted in the home Isles in 1956, the clandestine work gambled everything on a general uprising against the confused and undermanned garrison force. The gamble miraculously paid off. With the British Army bogged down at home, the revolutionaries had the momentum to seize Accra and other key positions. A significant portion of the native forces in Ghana defected, sealing the revolution's victory. The Ghanaian underground had already formed clandestine ties to American intelligence, and they immediately requested American support in defending their gains. Once the Americans entered the picture, plans for a joint Anglo-French counterattack were shelved indefinitely. In addition, Ghana found an unlikely ally far too close to the heart of Europe, Sweden. The Swedes entered a relationship with the Ghanaian government, agreeing to provide them farms, including planes for the Air Force, and diplomatic ties developed quickly. Two princes discussed. Interesting indeed. So, this is, from what I'm gathering, the essential leftovers of the Cameroon People's Government, if we can even call it that. This is Ghana, led by Kwame Nkrumah. In our timeline, he was, I forget if he was the immediate leader of Ghana once it gained independence or shortly after. Interesting guy. I'm not entirely sure if he was a great guy or a bad guy or somewhere in between. I know he ended up being overthrown by another guy. I forget his name. Let's see if I can look it up. Kwame Nkrumah, who ended up succeeding him. I don't think that was him. I ended up dying in exile in Romania. Bit of an authoritarian guy, but bit of a personality cult guy, and a big Pan-Africanist. Generally kind of popular nowadays, from what I can tell. Maybe not everything about him. I don't know. If we have any Ghanaians watching right now, please go ahead and inform me, because I'd be curious. So we got some interesting boosts here. The Black Star of Africa. As a vanguard of African national liberation, we are expected to support Pan-African movements across the continent. Interesting. So, Ghana, as little of a country, as small of a country as it is potentially going to have a pretty big impact on all of Africa, because it's the only immediately independent one that's not under a colonial government at all, at least in West Africa. So it's going to be very, very interesting. Let's go ahead and read a little bit about Nkrumah to give us an idea. Nkrumah's star shines from Accra, painting an imperialized continent's population with bright hopes. They, too, will be free. It shines in his speeches, which inspire people to take up arms, in his portraits, whose eyes summon strength for those seizing their rights, and in his policies, which portray the same virtuous ideals he claims to protect. Francis Nwia Kofi Nkrumah was born on September 21st, 1909, as the ninth son to a wealthy but absent goldsmith father and educated-minded mother. He was first exposed to Pan-Africanist ideas of Marcus Garvey and W.B. Du Bois by his headmaster, which had a lasting effect on Nkrumah. Nkrumah studied in the U.S. from 1935 until 1947, when he returned to the British Gold Coast as Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. By 1949, the Convention People's Party was Ghana's leading independence organization, and Nkrumah's cadre instilled that group of socialist and Pan-Africanist ideals. The CPP violently took power in 1956, decisively defeating British colonial forces and replacing British rule of the Republic of Ghana. As Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah has markedly improved Ghanaians' economic conditions while terminating the nation's democracy and emphasizing his own party's state rule. He is at once a dictator and a liberator, a despot and a humanist, a paranoid bent on making allies, and above all else, an enigma of contradictions, whose force of personality continues to drive world events. A bit of main character syndrome, but very interesting at the same time as well. We have some interesting stuff going on here, I think. The success of the Ghanaian Revolution Ghanaian? I think it's Ghanaian. I don't know. If anyone knows in the comments, go and let me know. The first of its kind in Africa sent shockwaves across the continent. The aura of European invincibility had been shaken to its core during the Second World War as Africans watched their overlords succumb to the German juggernaut, but that aura gradually returned over the years as attempts to break free of colonial rule had ended failure and slaughter, from Kenya to Madagascar. Ghana served as a reminder that struggle was not hopeless, and despite the odds, freedom was in fact possible for those willing to fight. It was for this reason that 1956 would be known as the Year of Africa. In 1962, when the game's events begins, Britain holds free colonies in West Africa: Gambia, Sierra Leone, and Nigeria. Gambia remains a largely stable colony due to its small size and is well placed to weather any storms that might come. It is indirectly ruled outside the capital of Bathurst, and the colonial economy is dominated by the United Africa Company. The same cannot be said for Sierra Leone, which is by far the most dysfunctional part of the British Empire in 1962. Rebels de facto administer much of the country's interior, and it is well known that Liberia and Ghana are both backing their own factions within the party. Ghana backing the All People's Congress, and Liberia backing the Sierra Leone People's Party. Nigeria is by far the largest colony that Britain holds in Africa, and it is an extremely wealthy and profitable one, but one that is fundamentally dependent on British-backed traditional exiles to extract wealth and run the country, with very little direct presence beyond a few colonial officials. The second great uprising in Britain proper will change it all for British West Africa, as a recall of the British Army to the Home Isles will result in rebels successfully capturing Freetown, the Nigerian colonial administration being forced to cut a deal with the traditional elites for independence, as the Cameroonian UPC invades parts of the colony. Gambia will be Britain's last holdout in West Africa, with the West African frontier force retreating there, rather. The fall of Nigeria and Sierra Leone will spell a total reorientation of British colonial policy to focus near exclusively on East African affairs. Oh, that answers my question. That's what I get for not pre-reading this too well. I glanced at this a little bit, but I just came back from Yosemite today with my girlfriend, and I saw it drop, so I was like, okay, I'll scan through this real quick. I'll see what's up. I did not get a good chance to see what was up. I'll do more thorough reading so I don't just blindly spread misinformation next time. But hey, what are you going to do? Now we have French West and Equatorial Africa. So let's take a look at what we got here. So Pierre Boyot. Let's see if we can find anything about this guy. I only see a French Wikipedia page on him. So let's just see what the Google Translate gives us. Senior French civil servant. Is he still out now? It's weird how they formed it up. While stationed in Guadeloupe, he attempted to implement by extra legal means a policy of forced abortions. Jesus fucking Christ. Oh my God. Oh. Jesus fucking Christ. Okay. That's right. That's where we're going here. Okay. Pierre Boulot. There's no way to pronounce that. I don't know how to pronounce it. Here we go. Is a relatively new face in French West Africa's colonial administration, yet to the natives he represents the same old colonialism they have languished under for years. Born in... Hold on.
Neuilly-sur-Seine.
Born in
Neuilly-sur-Seine.
Boyot studied literature, history, and philosophy in Paris's most revered establishments. After graduating, he joined the national bureaucracy as a prefectural administrator in Brittany, soon rising through the ranks with a strict policeman's reputation. As a member of both military cabinet and Treble Madagascar, Boyot directed French forces in putting down the Malagasy nationalist insurrection using tactics that he described simply as pacification without worrying about the fate of the population. That's my French impression I'm working on a little bit. Feel free to give me notes. From there, he oversaw operations in Algeria and West Africa before the French government finally assigned him to West Africa in 1961. Here, Paris hoped Boyot could defeat the rebels organizing here, just as he had the FLN of the MDRM. Despite that, Boyot knows France's defeat is a foregone conclusion. Ghana exposed the belly of the French colonial empire, and the renewed Cameroonian revolution was doubtless to spread. Boyot shows no restraint in dealing with these rebels and their kin, and still they multiply quicker than they can be removed. The question now is simple. What will come after? So we have the organs of exploitation, which is us, basically, not us, the French here, the French West Africa, just taking as much as they can from this land and sending it to the French state. National Revolution. This is how Africa's doing with that going on. The change from the Republic to the French state, and how it's not going very well over there, apparently. Widespread instability. Go fucking figure. We have this, Indigno. French is a hard language to pronounce. I apologize to any French people watching this right now. I am probably giving you all a headache, and I apologize. Unfair colonial laws that just help out the bureaucrats and all the colonialists. All the white people, basically. And then West African mega projects. So this is kind of interesting. They're working on the Trans-Saharan Railroad. Looks like land cultivation, stuff like that. Interesting stuff. An interesting little structuring of it all, but we'll see where it goes. On June 22nd, 1940, in a railroad car nestled in the Compiègne forest, a delegation of French and German officials affixed their signatures to an armistice that would take France out of the Second World War. This elaborate reversal of the 1918 armistice, arranged with all of Hitler's vindictive pettiness, was only a foretaste of the new order that the German Reich was being imposed upon Europe. Weeks later, shell-shocked French government met at a sleepy spa town of Vichy to hand over full constitutional power to a new collaboration government led by Philippe Pétain. The Third Republic was dead. The French state had been born. Abrupt as it was, the transition from Third Republic to French state was not quite so stark in France's vast colonial empire in Africa as it was in the metropole. It would not be wrong to say that the Révolution Nationale promulgated by the new regime was already well known to the peoples of Guinea, Madagascar, or Moyen Congo. For most of the eminent colonial administrators and theorists of the time, men like Pierre Bourson, the Governor-General of Equatorial Africa, and Georges Hardy, former director of the École Coloniale, it was clear that, the mission to civilize aside, the elevation of natives into the position of fully empowered Frenchmen was untenable and inadvisable. Under the new government, moreover, the previous ambivalent attitude towards assimilation morphed into a hostile rejection, where segregation and racism experienced by everyday colonial subjects became increasingly pronounced. For the small number of Debrouillés, those natives lucky enough to have assimilated through westernization, the dawn of the French state meant that their hard-won citizenship was now all but worthless. Instead, French authorities redoubled their attention on cultivating their traditional native leadership within their colonies, handpicked chieftains, royal scions, and religious elites. Of course, not all of the French were so quick to accept the defeat and humiliation in German hands. Only a few days before the armistice on June 18, 1940, General Charles de Gaulle broadcast a plea from London for continued resistance against German occupiers. De Gaulle, a divisional tank commander who had distinguished himself during the Battle of France, had taken leadership of the exiled French forces, willing to continue the fight alongside the Allies, albeit with difficulties. Few men and even fewer officers were willing to join de Gaulle, with the vast majority of the French officer corps deserting their commissions to fight with such a ragtag crew was far from an attractive proposition. To make matters far worse, the attempt by the Royal Navy to scuttle a French fleet at Marseille El Kébir forever tarnished the reputation of the free French, who were now viewed contemptuously as merely puppets of the traitorous British. From Dakar to Tenerife, colonial officials declared their loyalty to the new government in Vichy, with one exception. So I'd cue the Sigma music right now, but unfortunately, that would get this video claimed. In August 1940, the governor of Chad, the Chad governor of Chad, I apologize. You have to make this joke. I refuse to believe that they just chose Chad arbitrarily there. Either there's a historical justification for it, or it's just funny. It's just a funny in joke. It very well could be the former, but I want to believe it's the latter right now. The governor of Chad declared his allegiance to the Free French, setting off a domino effect that saw all of Equatorial Africa, except Gabon, aligned with de Gaulle. Gabon's governor, at the urging of a small settler elite population, refused to yield, but the Free French were able to overthrow him out by the end of November, and remained protected from Vichy's invasion by the British garrison in Nigeria. Despite this dramatic victory, the Free French remained an underdog. Efforts to disseminate propaganda into French West Africa through friendly Nigeria met with mixed success, and officers' defections remained few and far between. Attempt to capture Dakar failed in September 1940, and the war in Europe continued to go in Germany's favor. Meanwhile, in Vichy, the colonies played a key role in the new French state's ideology and strategy. Officially neutral, the regime had time to focus on its immediate needs, namely rebuilding and paying reparations to Germany with funds acquired through the empire. To compensate for loss of external trade with Western powers, France sought to exploit its colonial resources more extensively than ever before. The use of forced labor, procured through the Code l'Indigène, a constant feature of French colonial rule in Africa, was expanded to meet the labor needs of mines and settler-owned plantations across French Africa. Dissidents like the unfortunate Sylvanus Olympio of Togo were rounded up and thrown in dark cells, or else simply executed. While this served the immediate need of national recovery, some of the French state looked towards grand designs for Africa. In 1941, laborers sourced from internment camps in the Algerian interior broke ground on the much-discussed Trans-Saharan Railroad, a concept going back decades. The Trans-Saharan Railroad would connect French Algeria to the key cities in West Africa, namely Dakar and Abidjan. The cost of such a project in terms of time, manpower, and resources had always put a pause on such dreams, but the French state was eager to prove its capabilities. This railway would provide an overland connection between the north and south, while also integrating the Office du Niger, a massive irrigation project covering over 75,000 hectares of land, into the imperial economy. Coerced African laborers, Spanish Republican exiles, prisoners of war, Algerian Jews, and other dissidents were put to work, enduring horrific conditions and high mortality rates. Well, that's sad. The German victory in the Second World War was seen by many in the French state as a vindication of their collaboration, and following British integration into the German sphere, the Nazi peace opened Africa to pan-European exploitation. Still, the war had taken its toll on France and its once-spanning global empire. Only in sub-Saharan Africa did the empire remain largely intact, as colonies elsewhere were ceded or seized by other states. What remained was French in name, but also open to large-scale German presence and investment. With peace secured in Europe, the French state, backed by the free manpower of Germany and Britain, turned its attention towards French Equatorial Africa. By the end of 1945, the Federation was once again under Paris's control, and the Free French were stateless rebels, tied to no territory, and no viable means of success against the French state. So Free France is pretty much out. It's Jover for them, at least as a state territory, a territorial presence. I can speak. I can obviously speak. The experiences of the war and life under the French state had, however, left an indelible mark on all subjects of the empire. The political consciousness of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, had been awakened. For Equatorial Africa, this interim period of life under free French rule, although far from utopian, threw the policies of the re-established French state control into stark relief. Dozens of movements across the AEF emerged in the years after the war, many led by former Free French personnel. With military training, allied equipment, and clandestine support from across the Congo, these groups became the headache of the French colonial ministry. The next fire to break out was in Madagascar in 1947, followed by Cameroon and the British Gold Coast, all of which garnered violent responses from the European empires. In Cameroon, Ruben Diop organized the Union des Populations du Cameroun, the UPC, a left-wing Pan-Africanist resistance movement. Madagascar and the Gold Coast revolutions failed, but the UPC fought on through the remainder of the 1950s. France's colonies stagnated during the post-war decade. Evolus were becoming leaders in independent movements across the Federation, working alongside urban workers who had suffered when the French state outlawed all independent trade unions. French colonial policy had always been wary of creating an African proletariat class, and the peasant venerating ideologues of the Révolution Nationale found common cause with pragmatic colonial officers in looking to ensure that the vast majority of natives remained engaged in rural occupations. As in AEF, many of those groups were successors of war-era resistance movements connected to the Free French, and the most prominent of these was Léopold Sédar Senghor's-based Conseil de Résistance Socialiste Africaine, the CRSA. Of course, these groups were not at all equipped to move directly to armed struggle. For years, they could do little more than organize like-minded independent seekers. This status quo changed in 1956, the Year of Africa. Following a stunning revolution, the new Ghanaian government secured its independence by seeking American support in exchange for providing vital equipment to various groups across the region. As Ghana established its credentials as a leading beacon of Pan-African liberation, many of the West African movements relocated their leadership to Accra. President Nkrumah was only too happy to host them. In equatorial Africa, the Ghanaian revolution had even more dramatic repercussions. Years of persistent resistance across the region destabilized the colonial regime, and the AEF, already economically backwards compared to West Africa, was becoming a major financial liability. Instability resulting from the Ghanaian Revolution, a UPC offensive, and outside agitation meant that in 1957, after uprisings across the colonial federation, French authorities opted to withdraw settlers, infrastructure, and garrisons in favor of strengthening their presence in West Africa. And just like that, this is what we're looking at. So we have a faction of the United States of Latin America, like Cameroon, Gabon, Moyen Congo, Central African Republic, and you know him, you love him, Chad. A little reducted in size, it looks like, but still the Chad we know and love. Simultaneously with the French retreat, African-led governments, backed by Free French advisors and supplemented by the Congolese armed forces, organized new republics in the Union, led by Leopold's favorite, Barthélemy Boganda. These resulting 5 states formed a union nominally led by Boganda, the United States of Latin Africa, which counterbalanced African self-government with Free French, Congolese, and American economic penetration, as well as the increasingly centralizing and authoritarian attitudes of Boganda. Confrontations between the states and the center over USLA's economy, military, and foreign policy favored the states, and slowly what was supposed to be an African superunion found itself a weakened confederation of disparate states. Matters worsened for the USLA and Cameroon, the most populous federal republic. The post-French power vacuum allowed the UPC to seize land and equipment to mount a renewed bid for power. Backed by Ghanaian aid, Nairobi's guerrillas prevented federal Cameroon from taking root of the country and instead made the Yaoundé Republic depend on USLA support. With that will of aid increasingly drying up and the continued weakening of the Bangui-based federation's power, the future of equatorial Africa unity looks bleak. Interesting. I'm going to look up these guys real quick. So, Paul Prisot. Another French Wikipedia article coming in clutch. Oh, he died in the same place Pierre was born. The first president of the Territorial Assembly of Cameroon. Looks like a rich guy. Yeah. Rich, generic, African collaborator, I suppose. Let's look up. Ahmed Koulamala. Well, he has a Wikipedia page in English, so he may be a bit more prominent. The PSIT. Social Party of Chad. Strange son of a sultan of... How do you pronounce that? It doesn't give me the option to get a pronunciation. Islamist, possibly, vaguely. I'm guessing the main figure is going to be this guy, so I'm going to save him for last. John Hillary Obambe. Former president of Gabon, it seems. Okay. His training as a practicing Catholic and customs official helped him make an integrated man, one of whom's political power is not an end of himself. He's installed as president of Gabon during a coup. Only lasted 3 days, and then he got got sentenced to hard labor in exile. Interesting. Close the rest of these guys. They're giving me the grapes. Jock. Opangolt. Former Prime Minister of the Republic of Congo. Okay, so, nothing really notable there. Finally, this guy. Uganda. I'm getting, the first result I get is a high school named after him. I want to show this to you guys. That's the first result that pops up when you look up his name. Last, we're looking for this guy. Central African politician and independence figure. Was he succeeded by the guy who LARPed as a Napoleon? Nah, no. No, it's this guy. Oh, seems to be a pretty respectable guy, all things considered. Interesting. Was it the Daco guy? I think it was the Central African Republic that ended up LARPing as, Hold on, let me look this up real quick. This is a total LARPed as... He's in fucking Kaiser Redux. John Bodell Bacasa, that's him. There we go. This dude was fucking crazy. He claimed himself Emperor of Central Africa. Basically bankrupted the whole country to recreate Napoleon's coronation for his own declaration as emperor. And then he probably served human flesh at his coronation as well. Dude was nuts. And if I don't see him in somewhere in Debrouillez-Vous, I'm going to be very disappointed. Yeah. They killed the lake. I'm kind of going to miss the lake a little bit. Not too much, but it was a charming thing. Let's see what we got comment-wise. Look at that. Oh, just so you know, De Gaulle is not dead. There's apparently an old Focus that said it was dead or something there. Free France is still going to be around as a non-state actor. There we go. Chad Governor. I'm glad I wasn't the only person who thought of that. So, looks like the African Reich colonies are dead. We no longer have the giant genocidal concentration camp with Hutig, which is probably for the best. Just throwing that out there. We'll have to see. We'll see what happens with South Africa later on. We're just gonna leave that. I think that's part 3. Until we get to that point, though, I'm going to leave things there. This was part 1. We'll have part 2 out probably tomorrow, and have the parts come out every day if I can get around to it, which I hope to. I'm getting ready to go on vacation soon. I also have work the next couple of days, so it's going to be a little tough to do it, but I'll hopefully find a way. But thanks for watching, gang. If you like to leave a like, if not, feel free to just like any comments, feedback, especially feedback on all the tangents I went on, color commentary, all that. If you like how I did it, or you didn't like it, or if I think I should just cut it out, let me know. I'm looking for feedback here. If you want to keep updated with these uploads as they come out, or any of my uploads in general, hit the sub button, maybe a notification bell. I usually do uploads weekdays, sometimes on Saturdays as well. So if you're interested in that, check that out. And yeah, check out my other links in the description box below. And I think from there, I'm going to go ahead and leave things there. So thank you as always for watching, my friends. My name has been Mr. Dogboat333. I thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time. Adieu.